All right, buckle up, everybody. We're going deep into Wuthering Heights today.
Sounds exciting.
Oh, it is. I mean, we all know the book, probably read it a time or
At
two.
least.
But today, we've got this stack of essays here, and we're going to use them to dig into those layers of meaning, the stuff most people miss on a first read, you know?
Really get into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. It's amazing how many critics see Wuthering Heights as, like, way more than just a love story gone wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
There's all this social commentary, rebellion against societal norms, even like whispers of other literary giants hidden in the pages.
It's so rich. So much to unpack.
Right. Okay, so let's jump right in with this first essay.
Okay.
It's by these feminist scholars, Gilbert and Gubar, and they've got a pretty bold claim.
Oh.
They say Wuthering Heights is actually a response to John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Wow, that's a big one.
Right. They're arguing that Emily Bronte took those classic themes like the fall, exile, rebellion, all that.
Right, right.
But she flipped the script. So instead of a fallen man, we've got Catherine Earnshaw struggling against like the constraints of a patriarchal society.
Very interesting.
So you might think Wuthering Heights is just this tragic love story.
Right.
But what if it's actually a radical reimagining of the fall from grace, but with a woman as the rebel?
Huh. I like that. It's like taking that classic narrative and turning it on its head.
Exactly.
And they have some pretty convincing evidence in the text, too, like that scene where Catherine declares she feels like an outcast in her own world.
Oh, right. And her blood, she says her blood rushes into a hell of tumult after a fight with Heathcliff.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. And it directly mirrors Satan's anguish after being cast out of heaven in Paradise Lost.
Whoa.
But, from a woman's perspective.
That's a really interesting parallel. But is this whole, like, Bronte responding directly to Milton thing?
Yeah.
Is that widely accepted by other, literary critics?
Yeah. Well, not entirely. Some scholars, they think Bronte's work is just too complex to be reduced to a single source of inspiration.
I can see that.
Yeah. They argue her influences are much broader than that.
Right. Makes sense.
So it's definitely one interpretation among many.
Yeah. Which honestly makes you think even harder about all the layers in this book.
Oh, for sure.
Now, the next essay we have here is by Dorothy Van Ghent.
Okay.
And she focuses on something called the two children archetype.
Yeah.
In Bronte's writing. It's really interesting.
What is that?
So she even finds examples of this archetype in some of Bronte's poetry, like these lines. And only he had locks of light, and she had raven hair, while now his curls are dark as night, and hers as morning fair.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that light and dark imagery, it's
Yeah.
like central to this archetype. Van Ghent argues it represents a duality, like the light-dark, good-bad dichotomy
Okay.
that we see played out in Catherine and Heathcliff's relationship.
Right. I'm seeing it.
So it's not just romantic love. It's more like these two characters are embodying these fundamental, like, opposing forces.
Exactly. And she even suggests there might be a potentially incestuous element to this archetype, reflecting a desire for wholeness and a struggle against those societal limitations,
Oh, wow. Okay. Incestuous element.
Potentially.
That adds a whole other layer of complexity. But it does, like, make you think about how intertwined Catherine and Heathcliff are.
Definitely.
And how society is, like, constantly trying to rip them apart.
Always these external forces.
And speaking of Catherine being torn, the next essay we're looking at focuses on her decision to marry Edgar Linton instead of Heathcliff. And it's described as a symbolic fall from grace.
Interesting.
Because what's fascinating is that this fall isn't just about, like, romance.
Oh.
It's about Catherine having to choose between her true, passionate self, symbolized by Heathcliff and Wuthering Heights, right?
Right.
And the world of, like, social acceptability, which is represented by Edgar and Thrushcross Grange.
Those two settings, Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange, they really do become characters themselves, or each representing a different set of values.
And Catherine is just, like, caught between those two worlds, forced to make this impossible choice.
Right.
And that brings us to Heathcliff, who embodies the wildness of Wuthering Heights in a way no one else does.
Yes.
And this next essay by Susan Meyer has a really interesting take on him.
Okay, what does she say?
She calls him a figure of reverse imperialism.
Reverse imperialism? That's fascinating. Tell me more.
So Meyer's argument focuses on Heathcliff's, ambiguous racial identity. Because remember, Bronte never tells us exactly where he comes from.
Right.
And his dark skin marks him as an outsider. He's marginalized, nameless,
Nameless.
denied access to language and literacy. And those things, like symbolize the power dynamics of colonialism.
It's true. We never do learn his real name, do we?
Exactly. That namelessness is such a powerful symbol of his lack of place in society. But then, through his, quest for revenge, he manages to flip the script,
He does.
on those who oppressed him.
Turns the tables completely.
Exactly. And I remember that scene where Isabella Linton fantasizes about Heathcliff's parents
Yeah.
being like royalty from China and India.
Yeah.
It's like Bronte is deliberately playing with our assumptions about race and power.
Absolutely. It's like Heathcliff, the gypsy foundling,
Right.
becomes this figure who completely disrupts conventional ideas.
About who holds power.
Exactly. And who was marginalized. And while his actions, they can be pretty cruel
Oh,
and
definitely.
destructive,
Oh, yeah.
Meyer argues that they expose the hypocrisy and violence that's at the heart of the society that created him.
It's like he's holding up a mirror
Yes.
to that society, reflecting its own ugliness back at it.
Exactly.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but
Yeah.
I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Wuthering Heights.
Oh, for sure. And as we move into the second half of the novel, we'll see how the consequences of these conflicts play out,
Right.
in even more complex and disturbing ways.
Can't wait.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore the second generation of characters
Okay.
and the legacy of Catherine and Heathcliff's, turbulent relationship.
Okay, so we're back in the world of Wuthering Heights,
Yeah.
and things are getting even more complicated now.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a new generation of characters coming onto the scene.
Right.
Catherine's daughter, also named Catherine, and Heathcliff's son, Linton, among others.
It's really interesting how Bronte creates this almost like a mirror image of the original love triangle,
Right.
but with these interesting twists.
Yeah, we've got Catherine the Second, like some critics call her. She seems to have inherited a bit of her mother's spirit, but
Right.
she's been raised in that, more refined world of Thrushcross Grange.
Right. Completely different environment.
And then there's Linton Heathcliff, who, as we learned earlier, is kind of a pale shadow of his father.
Yeah. Definitely not cut from the same cloth.
So through these new characters, Bronte keeps exploring those themes of, social constraint and rebellion, but in a whole new way.
It's like she's taking those same ideas
Yeah.
and showing us how they play out in a different generation.
It's interesting how Catherine II, at first, seems like this perfect good girl.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Dutiful, caring, even trying to, tame the wildness of Wuthering Heights.
With her love of flowers and books.
Right. Totally different from her rebellious mother.
But don't forget those moments when she,
Yeah.
sneaks out to explore the moors
Oh, right.
and forms that forbidden attachment to Linton.
Yeah, it's like those little adventures beyond the walls of Thrushcross Grange are her own little rebellions.
Exactly. Even if she doesn't fully realize it at the time.
Right.
And Bronte cleverly juxtaposes Catherine II's story with Heathcliff's, ongoing quest for revenge.
Yeah.
So while the younger generation is trying to figure out their desires and deal with societal pressures,
Right.
Heathcliff is still there lurking in the background.
Like a puppet master.
Exactly. Manipulating everyone to get what he wants.
Which kind of brings us to Isabella's tragic fate.
Oh, yes.
She thought she was escaping the confines of Thrushcross Grange by running off with Heathcliff.
Right.
But
she ends up trapped in a much worse situation.
look, a cautionary tale.
It really is.
Yeah.
About the dangers of, romanticizing those brooding, Byronic heroes.
Yeah.
She buys into the myth, but the reality at Wuthering Heights is harsh.
Be careful what you wish for.
Right, exactly.
The grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
Especially when that other side is like a desolate moor ruled by a vengeful Heathcliff.
And through Isabella's suffering, we really see the true cost of Heathcliff's rage.
Yeah.
He's become so consumed by his desire for revenge, He's just perpetuating that cycle of cruelty and violence that's plagued Wuthering Heights for, generations.
It's not just about love gone wrong.
No.
It's about how trauma and societal injustice can really, warp individuals and just poison relationships.
It's heavy stuff.
It's dark, intense.
And it gets even darker, I think, with the way Heathcliff treats his own son, Linton.
Ugh, yeah.
Using him as a pawn in his schemes, forcing him into that loveless marriage with Catherine II.
It's brutal. Shows you just how deep his depravity runs.
But even in all this darkness, Bronte does give us a little glimmer of hope
Oh, good.
with the relationship between Catherine II and Hareton Earnshaw.
Oh, right. They're so sweet together.
Their relationship offers a real ray of light in all this
At
darkness.
first, they seem like such an unlikely pair.
They do. She's the, educated, refined young lady.
And he's like this rough, uneducated young man.
Raised in a harsh environment. But through their shared suffering and their genuine affection for each other,
Yeah.
they start to bridge that gap between them.
And there's that beautiful scene where Catherine teaches Hareton to read.
Yes, it's so powerful.
It's not just about literacy. It's about
Yeah.
her giving him a way to break free from that cycle of ignorance and brutality.
Absolutely. The cycle that's defined life at Wuthering Heights for so long.
And in doing so, Catherine is also taking control of her own destiny, right?
Yes. She's choosing to use her knowledge and privilege to make a positive impact.
Breaking free from those limited roles society has tried to impose on her.
Exactly.
So we've got this potential for a happy ending, this glimmer of hope amidst all the darkness.
Right.
But knowing Bronte,
Uh-oh.
it's probably not going to be that simple.
You're right to be skeptical. Bronte rarely gives us those tidy resolutions.
It's true.
Wuthering Heights, with all its tangled relationships and exploration of human nature's dark side,
Yeah.
is no exception.
So let's see where Bronte takes us in this final part of our deep dive.
All right.
Does love truly conquer all? Or are we left with a sense of lingering unease?
Yeah.
All right, so we've made it to the final chapter of Wuthering Heights. And on the surface, it kind of seems like Bronte might be giving us a happy ending, right,
Yeah.
with Catherine and Hareton.
Mm-hmm.
They're clearly falling for each other. And maybe, just maybe, they can heal some of those wounds of the past,
There's definitely a sense of hope there. They seem to be finding a kind of peace that their parents, well, they never could. But
Right.
remember, we're talking about Emily Bronte.
Oh, right.
She doesn't usually go for those simple, straightforward resolutions.
True. So what should we be paying attention to in this final section? What details give us clues about Bronte's real intentions,
Well, one of the most striking things to me is the contrast
Contrast.
between that cozy scene of Catherine and Hareton reading by the fire
Yeah.
and the description of the decaying church nearby.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
It's almost like a visual representation of the bigger picture, you know what I mean?
You mean even though they're finding some individual happiness,
Mhm.
those social structures, the things that cause so much pain,
Right.
they're still broken.
Exactly. Those broken windows, the crumbling roof. It's a powerful symbol of societal and spiritual decay. It's something that can't just be ignored.
No, you can't just sweep that under the rug. And then, of course, there's that whole thing with Heathcliff's death
Oh, yeah.
and the merging of his and Catherine Earnshaw's graves. It's both beautiful and unsettling.
Right.
It's like their love, which was so passionate and so destructive in life, somehow finds this strange resolution in death.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Bronte leaves us with that image
Yeah.
of their bodies decomposing together,
Mhm.
becoming part of the landscape, the wild landscape of the moors.
Yeah.
And it really suggests that their love, in all its intensity, transcends even the boundaries of death.
But is it a triumph or a tragedy?
Hmm.
Are they finally united in peace? Or is it this final act of defiance
Yeah.
against a world that tried to keep them apart?
That's the brilliance of Bronte's ending. It's open to interpretation.
You really have to think about it.
Right. She doesn't give us easy answers. She leaves us with these haunting images
Yeah.
and questions that stick with you.
Long after you finish the book. I have to admit, the first time I read Wuthering Heights, I was so caught up in the romance, the drama.
Yeah.
I totally missed a lot of this deeper stuff.
It's easy to get swept up in the surface level.
It is. But going through these essays with you, it's like seeing the novel with fresh eyes.
It's amazing how much richer the experience becomes when you start to unpack it all. The symbolism, the social commentary, the echoes of other literary works. It's all there.
So what do you think is the most important thing for a reader to take away from Wuthering Heights? If you had to sum it up, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is that Wuthering Heights defies easy categorization. It's a love story, sure, but it's also about class and power, social constraints, the human capacity for both huge love and terrible violence. It makes you confront some uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world.
It really does. It's a book that stays with you, makes you think and feel deeply,
Absolutely.
even if you don't always like what you're seeing,
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes it a masterpiece.
So well said. Well, that about wraps it up for our deep dive into Wuthering Heights.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. I learned so much, and I know our listeners did too. And hey, if you're still pondering that image of Catherine and Heathcliff's graves, merging together,
Yeah.
think about it. What do you think Bronte's trying to say about freedom and connection in a world that's bound by all these societal rules and constraints? That's something to think about. Thanks for listening, everyone.